Good afternoon, everyone. Jeff DeBoer here, the President and CEO of the Real Estate Roundtable, and honored to be in that role. Before we turn it over to our chair, John Fish, and Secretary Walsh, and Owen Thomas and Fred Seigel for this great discussion on the case for back to the workplace, I just want to give a couple of little housekeeping things. First of all, we have been extremely busy here in Washington. Just very quickly, the EB-5 program, which is important to a lot of you, I know, has been cleaned up and extended for 5 years in an unbelievable development. We're currently looking at the SEC rules. They're very active on ESG regulations. We expect those next week. They've got some proposed regulations out dealing with fund advisors and new requirements there. Our diversity project continues to march forward, and I think we're on the cusp of making some very exciting announcements here in the next month or so about that project. And in the tax world, we're looking at how we can provide some incentive to convert, obsolete or older office buildings into much needed housing. So we're very busy here. Thank you for your support to help us achieve those goals. We're going to be in person. We're, of course, in person back at the workplace here at the Roundtable, but we're going to be in person for our meetings coming up here, April 25th and 26th. We have our Roundtable meeting. And then in June, we have our all-member meeting. So I hope you can come to those events. But we have learned that these video events are useful to stay connected and inform people between our meetings. So we're doing this today. And I want to announce that next Friday at 11 a.m., we're going to have a discussion regarding the Ukraine and the terrible situation over there. We have the former security head, Alexander Vindman, with us, and should be an exciting conversation. So with that, I will end. I will only also say we have our new policy agenda is out to you. If you need any copies to give to other meetings that you're doing or your staff, we're happy to provide them. Let us know. And our opening paragraph in our introduction from John and I concerns this very topic, the benefits of getting and the case to get back to the workplace. So with that, I will turn it over to our chair, John Fish. John?
Jeff, thank you very much. And again, I want to thank all of you for joining us for the Roundtable's Town Hall as we as a team make the case to get back to the workplace. We're 2 years from the start of the coronavirus outbreak, and the toll of COVID-19 on our country and over 900,000 Americans we've lost has been catastrophic. It is not an exaggeration to say that the pandemic and the social unrest it unleashed has changed our nation like other monumental events in our history. The pandemic changed us, just like 9/11 or the 1960s or the Great Depression before that changed us. But it feels like we are finally starting to reawaken from that long slumber. Thank goodness masks are coming off. It's hard to get a restaurant reservation. Schools are back in person just about everywhere in the country. And interesting for all of us, arenas for March Madness are full to the brim. Just remember when it was only a short time ago you had to wait in line to get into the grocery store and wipe down the cart. Thankfully, those days are behind all of us. For our industry, our buildings and offices never close completely. And of course, our apartments in multifamily buildings have experienced a higher than average rate of occupancy, as many of our residents were lucky enough to work from home. Well, we have turned the corner on the pandemic. It's not 2019 all over again. And according to a Pew Research report, as more offices reopen, most workers today say they want to work from home by choice rather than by necessity. That is, they are no longer worried about catching COVID-19 at work. Rather, they want to work from home to strike a better balance with their personal lives, which is why many of us are asking, what is the new normal for the real estate industry? Today, we have an incredible panel that will help us answer that specific question. And let me begin by saying first, it is a great honor that my friend, Marty Walsh, the U.S. Secretary of Labor, is with us. The son of an Irish immigrant and native of Boston's Dorchester neighborhood. I came to know Marty very well as the mayor of Boston for 5 years and many years before that. Mr. Secretary, I hope you had a fantastic St. Patrick's Day yesterday, and I'm thrilled you've decided to continue that celebration with us this afternoon. I'm also deeply grateful to Owen Thomas and Fred Seigel for their leadership and participation on today's panel. Many of you know Owen and Fred as our colleagues on the roundtable. Owen is the CEO of Boston Properties, and I'm pleased to serve with him on the Real Estate Roundtable's board of directors. And Fred, a very close friend, is the president and chief operating officer of Beacon Capital Partners, also based in Boston. So I would say the panel is stacked, I would say, in favor of Red Sox Nation. And it's great baseball is back. Mr. Secretary, I want to thank you for your efforts in those negotiations. I'm sure not too many people are aware that you were working behind the scenes. And of course, as Jeff pointed out, Jeff is our president and CEO. And Jeff, I just want to stop and pause and thank you and the entire Real Estate Roundtable team for all you've done to support us during the pandemic. Moving on now, we have some important business to discuss. And how do we reopen our economy, our buildings, and welcome back our workforce? So what I'd like to do this afternoon is begin with some questions to Secretary Walsh. Secretary Walsh, following the most recent federal jobs report, you explained that we are experiencing an historic worker-centric recovery from the pandemic. Could you elaborate on what that means, Mr. Secretary?
Yeah, let me start by thanking you, John, for asking me to be here today. It's an honor to be here. It's great to see my friend Fred Seigel and also Owen, who as mayor of Boston, I did a lot of work with both Boston Properties and Beacon here in the city of Boston and in the philanthropic world as well. So I want to thank them both and their companies for what they did here in the city and in the country, quite honestly. You know, when you think about you already framed it really well about the pandemic. I was the mayor when the pandemic started. My concern really was probably 2 months into the pandemic was we had a downtown area that nobody was in. We had businesses potentially shutting. We had offices that were being built. I was concerned about, will that stop? I was concerned about what the work life's going to look like. There was a lot of conversations about what was the new kind of office space going to be in the future. We really focused on, telework. That was the main focus. And what we're finding is completely different. We've seen since President Biden has taken office, 7.4 million jobs have returned back. People have returned back to work. 90% of pre-pandemic levels of people working are back to work. So we do have work to do to get to the 100% and beyond the 100%, quite honestly. And what we're seeing is that we have to think about it as companies are watching today and listening to this conversation about how do we bring people back to work and how do we do it. It needs to be worker-centered, meaning that we have to look about people have made a conscious decision to quit their job. People have made conscious decisions to go to different jobs. People have made, and granted, the real estate world, you house most of these folks. But again, the businesses that operate out of your buildings and operate, we have to think about how do we attract people back to the workplace? How do we create pathways at the Department of Labor? I'm really looking at workforce development and job training and investing in a different manner in that. I'm looking at apprenticeships and pre-apprenticeships. John, you know better than anyone on this call. When we hear apprenticeships, you and I think about building trades. Apprenticeships, pre-apprenticeships can be in other industries across this nation. We're working on trucking now. We're looking at healthcare. We're looking at nurses. We're looking at IT. We're looking at financial services. We want to partner with companies and businesses as we move here. Worker-centric means really making sure workers have what they need to be successful. The president often talks about from the growing the economy from the middle out and the bottom up. That really is creating opportunities for the middle class to be strong, and people that have not enjoyed the ability to get into the middle class, that they have a chance to get in the middle class. How do they do that? They do that by workforce development, job training, but we can't do it. We can't do it if we don't have business at the table with us.
Mr. Secretary, I couldn't agree more, and I want to thank you for your thoughtful comments. And I'd say more importantly, thank you for your leadership on this issue. As I often say, I think government is the one that asks people to go home, and we're hoping as a business community we can partner with government to entice people to come back. But one question I want to ask you, as you explained, our workforce has been through the historic disruption, and one would say it's a once-in-a-century pandemic. How have the patterns of work in America changed in the post-COVID era from before the pandemic?
Well, I think in some cases, as far as patents go, we have a major crisis in this country when it comes to childcare. We had a crisis pre-pandemic, and we have a bigger one now. We have an issue with families. What we've seen is a two-family house, one person not returning to the workforce, one person working. Part of that's work-life balance, but part of that's also the affordability of childcare or maybe adult care. So we're seeing issues there. We're seeing people working 2 and 3 and 4 jobs that they're saying, wait a second, I want to be able to work one job. We're seeing in the financial world where managers that earn good earnings are saying, wait a second, we want better life balance, work-life balance. We don't want to work these many hours. We don't want to be doing this. And I think that, we're also seeing a big problem with women not coming back to work. And in the last jobs report, the number of Black women didn't come back at the rate we anticipated. So we have to really be focused and intentional on the work we do to make sure we're attracting people back into the workforce, I think, number one. And number two, we're doing something, and you and I talked about this the other night, John, looking at the future of work. And when I say that, I'm not talking about the future of work 10 years from now, 15 years from now. I'm talking about the future of work tomorrow on Saturday. And how do we make sure that we're working with businesses and employers and people and workers' rights groups and unions to really think about what does that mean, and how do we create opportunities, whether it's better benefits and paid family leave, better health care, maybe a pension benefit, better wages. How do we able to do that while also supporting companies that can afford to do that? So I think that the future of work in America, in some cases, it might be as simple as working 3 days at home and 2 days in the office. In other ways, it's a little more complicated. I've spent a lot of time talking to major corporations in America. And I'll just give you 2 examples. One is Levi Strauss. In the beginning of the pandemic, we talked to them about retention and recruitment of workers. And what they said to me was they have a policy for paid family leave. And they really were able to use the paid family leave as an opportunity to retain their talent and recruit talent by simply, maybe not, the wages were decent, but having that paid family leave. Another one was American Express. I went to American Express. I was with the CEO a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about the model, how they used to be a Monday to Friday job. You'd go from wherever you live, New Jersey, Connecticut, New York, you'd go across the river, you'd go to the building, you'd be in there 5 days a week. And now they've been able to work to be able to do kind of hybrid schedules. And he said 2 things are happening. Number one, he feels the productivity is the same, if not better, than pre-pandemic. But secondly, the employees are definitely a lot more happier and understanding, and you create that opportunity. So I think that it's going to be ultimately about sharing best practices.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary. One comment I think is we introduced you. You were formerly the mayor of the city of Boston, but you also, prior to that, you were the head of the building trades and served in the legislature for many years in Massachusetts. So you really understand the importance of boots on the ground and what workers think and feel and how to touch their hearts and souls. So with that, as secretary, you've made it a priority to travel across the country and meet workers where they are. I noticed you went to Elon Musk's factory a couple of weeks ago. What are you hearing from the American workers on the factory floors, their hopes, their struggles, as you visit them in their home communities on ground zero?
Well, one of the biggest things I hear, and mostly from the communities that are in employment, that they're not earning a living wage, is the opportunity for better access into a better paying job and being able to help them skill up, if you will, or be educated, or through workforce development, workforce training. That's one of the biggest things I hear. I also hear it around the childcare piece. 2 aspects of it. One is the cares economy, that people don't have enough access to high quality childcare or high quality adult care for their parents when they have to go into some sort of assisted living. The second piece of that is we're hearing healthcare workers and care workers saying they can't afford to work in these industries anymore. So it's almost like a perfect storm is brewing, where we have a need for childcare. We're undervaluing or underpaying the people that work in those industries. And that's why, President Biden specifically talked about this and filed some legislation to deal with those issues. when I hear from employers, and I was at Tesla the other day, I was at, as I said, there's American Express, GE, I was at a bunch of different places over the country. I talked to managers, and their biggest problem is recruiting workers. Inevitably, when we get down to the conversation about the problems that they hear are the same issues we just talked about: lack of childcare, having to pay their employees more to have them come in the front door, and then also creating pathways inside the companies. The companies, Best Buy does this really well. They'll have somebody come into a company. They might start as a shipping, receiving person, and that person can have a pathway into leadership of the company and potentially CEO of the company. That's where the successful businesses are going to be successful in recruiting and retaining talents when they get creative outside the box. And the Good Job Initiative, quite honestly, is I want to bring employers to the table because I don't think it should be a government down program. I think it should be created by employees, employers, and organizations like unions and worker groups and things like that to really think about what's happening. Just one other thing you didn't ask me, organized labor has a piece to play here too. They have to look and think about their contracts and their structure and how they negotiate as well, because as the workplace evolves, as businesses evolve and change, as people have different ideas, the union contracts in a lot of cases will have to be changed as well. We'll have to catch up or change and adapt with the times as well.
I just want to comment on the union issues. I want to thank you very much because, of any person involved in labor, your degree of openness and flexibility on that conversation, I would say, is remarkable. And I think it's a breath of fresh air because we all know we have to be competitive as the United States of America in a global economy. And the idea of allowing us to have the tools in our box as employers to allow our workforce to be competitive is of paramount. So with that, let me just transition to Jeff. I know, Jeff, you're going to be asking Fred Seigel a few interesting questions. So thank you very much.
Thanks, John, and thank you, Mr. Secretary. And I do think that a lot of the comments that you raised about businesses encouraging employers to bring their employees back are some things that Owen and Fred are going to discuss here in just a minute. And we want to be a partner with you. One of the things that we've over the years learned is that we need to have good research on why we're doing and promoting these things. And we think it's terribly important that we get the workers, employees back to the workplace. Maybe in the short term, it's not showing up in GDP and lost opportunities, but we think it will over time. And Fred Seigel has been leading the charge here with some economists at Berkeley. And maybe, Fred, you could walk us through that research, what top line findings of lost revenue if trend lines continue and so forth. Fred?
Thank you, Jeff and John, and Secretary Walsh, thank you for your tremendous efforts and for all that you've done for the city of Boston over so many years. I'm really proud to have an office in Boston and really grateful for everything that you did. So, Jeff, as you mentioned, we had the opportunity to work with Professor Enrico Moretti, who really is an extraordinary labor and urban economist from Berkeley. The focus of the work has been on job creation pre-COVID and during the pandemic, as well as the impact on the fiscal health of major U.S. cities. And as the Secretary mentioned, labor market has bounced back. On the office side, office using employment is expected to fully recover this quarter, which is much faster than what we saw in the last two recessions. However, the number of people physically coming back to the office is still very disappointing. And the low number of workers in the office will certainly have negative consequences for businesses in the CBD, which we're already experiencing. And it will also have important negative effects on municipal revenues. So to gain more insight into this, and through the work of Professor Moretti and some of his staff, we accessed some interesting data on permanent work from home online job postings. And we measured the 100% work from home jobs as a share of all jobs. And then we looked back at pre-COVID data. So looking at that pre-COVID data, approximately 2 to 3% of all office using postings were 100% work from home. During the pandemic, that number has ranged from about 6% to about 10%. And then using that data and current building occupancy data, we set a baseline for municipal budgets going forward and then compared to actual 2019 budgets. And the conclusion is, if these trends continue, the results are going to be very, very concerning.
Fred, how about a couple of top line? I know that you've modeled, or they've modeled a few cities, Boston, I know, I believe San Francisco and Washington. Are there some similar highlights or trends that you want to bring up on this today?
Sure. So what we did was we examined 5 channels to look at the impact to municipal budgets. So one was property taxes and property values. We looked at employment and CBDs, sales tax revenue, hotel tax revenue, and transit revenue. What we didn't include was further impacts of potential declines in transfer tax collections and parking tax receipts. And then I think it's important to note that not all cities have the same tax structure. So each channel may show a different result for each individual city, but across the board, the news is not good for our cities and the many CBDs that rely on a thriving central business district. And what struck me, Jeff, was the magnitude of the impact on the 3 cities you mentioned and the other 5 that we modeled. So as an example, the property tax impact to San Francisco alone could be upwards of $390 million a year. If you look at the budget impact to the transit authority that serves Boston, it could be nearly $400 million per year if ridership continues at 2021 levels. While the 2021 stimulus packages were really saviors for states and cities in terms of helping them manage the deficits, those funds are time limited. They may not be available in future years. And then if you go to DC, the expected impact to the district translates into a $450 million reduction in property taxes. So, Jeff, when I say that the magnitude is what really struck me, when you factor in the consequences from all 5 channels that I just mentioned, we could be looking at a near-term fiscal situation that's pretty dire for cities. For the 3 cities that we just talked about, revenue could fall between 10 to 18% per year.
Pretty significant, Fred. Thank you. John mentioned the Pew research to start with, and then the secretary talked about how employers can encourage employees back, things that could be done. Obviously, transportation needs to be safe, and people need to feel that they're safe and healthy and so forth. But what do you think building owners, what are you doing in your buildings? And I'm sure we're going to ask Owen the same thing, but what do you think that building owners across the country could be doing to facilitate a more rapid return to the workplace?
Well, Jeff, one thing I'd like to say is that Owen and his team at Boston Properties have been wonderful to collaborate with on this issue. I mean, we've just developed an even closer relationship in terms of sharing information, and we're really grateful for Owen and his team's efforts. But I think, Jeff, the way we've been thinking about it, and John and Secretary Walsh, it's one thing for an employer to want their people back. It's an entirely different thing for the employer to want to come back. And there's a number of stakeholders who all have a part in this. Employers need to communicate the advantages of in-person working, whether it's better collaboration, driving more innovation, talent development, or some of the other benefits that we all see from being together. And I think many of the large San Francisco-based companies that have been participating in Mayor Breed's Welcome Back to San Francisco pledge did a tremendous job articulating this. City officials have their role as well, particularly when it comes to crime and safety. Amazon's announcement last week that they're moving 1,800 employees to alternative office space because of crime near their 3rd and Pine building really speaks volume to what's on the mind of employers and employees when it comes to safety. And then for the landlord, we really need to continue to step up our game. And that means creating environments that address employee health and wellness concerns. And we do that by investing capital. and providing state-of-the-art building systems, that are supported with real-time data that's shared with our tenants. I think that transparency and trust between tenants and landlords has never been more important than it is today. And then I think we've got to do all the things that we've been doing in the past, but we just have to do them better. We really do need to provide first-class amenities. But just as important, we have to program those amenities to create some connectiveness between tenants and employees. More hospitality spaces, integrated technology, outdoor space, bike rooms. To the secretary's comment about childcare, we've got to do a better job offering daycare. If we can't do it at our buildings, we got to figure out a way to cooperate with tenants to do it. And then we really need to highlight the commitment to sustainability. Communicating the building sustainability objectives helps establish a link with the employees' commitment to sustainability. And I don't know whether, Owen, you're seeing the same thing, but as we talk to investors today and tenants today, I've never seen the focus as strongly on sustainability and ESG in general. So Beacon's take is we really need to adopt a more holistic approach to the office and welcoming people back.
Thank you, Fred, for those. That tees up a lot of the rest of our discussion quite well, I think. I know from my own experience here in our building, we're about a third of our building is filled back up, and we're right here between the White House and the Capitol on Pennsylvania Avenue, and only a third in, but our parking lot is filled every day. So I don't know what the connectivity is there, but people that I talk to in the building, they want to feel safe here. They want to know that building owners are doing everything that they can, and then these newer things, not all that new, childcare and other things. Obviously, our industry has adapted to changes in demand and changes in the types of property that needed to be provided to businesses, and I'm sure that we'll do it in the future. Thank you, Fred, for that. And when this research is not done yet, is it? It's still preliminary, correct? So when that's so we'll get that out to people once it is finalized. But it's great to know that we're doing that. John, I'm going to push it back over to you and Owen and the secretary. John.
Jeff, thank you very much. And Fred, just to pick up on one comment you made about the employer sort of supporting a narrative to get people back to work. I heard an acronym a little while ago called CMLP, and it's what it is. It's culture, mentorship, leadership, and promotion. We've never heard of people build culture, mentorship, leadership, or promotion working remotely at the end of the day. And when we think about it in the real estate construction business and operations of real estate, what we do, we really don't build buildings for a living and operate them. We build people that build those buildings and operate them. So I think our industry is very, very poised to be in a position where we really can espouse the importance of culture, people working together, of mentorship, how important that is, of leadership by example, and of promotions at the end of the day. So it's a very interesting conversation. I know there's no silver bullet for this, but I think our industry, of all industries, can be very, very helpful in leading this conversation, establishing a narrative out there. So with that, I want to thank you for joining us again. And I just want to congratulate you and your leadership at Boston Properties, one of the most respected developers and operators in the country. And I know you've worked hard for that. And what I'd like to ask you is the following: is that, in your opinion, are the days of 9 to 5, 7 days a week, over? Are your business tenants and employees fully back to the office, or are they permanently working from home now? Or would you say some form of hybrid?
John, thank you for your kind comments, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you. I also, Secretary Walsh, thank you for being here, and I wanted to pass along best wishes from Brian Coop and our Boston-based team, who very much miss your leadership of the city of Boston. So thank you. And Fred, thank you for all your kind remarks. We also work with Dr. Moretti. I've had him with our board, and I find him to be an incredible resource. So John, to come to your question, our clients are definitely coming back to the office. However, I do think the structure of work has changed. So let me explain. So right now, as of last week, we had in San Francisco, about 40% of the workers were back in the office. So that's 40% of the people that were in the office in February of 2020 are back. That number in Boston is about 50%, and in New York is about 60%. And those are, with the exception of New York, post-pandemic highs. So it's going up every week. I can also tell you, as a New Yorker, riding the train, being at the trying to get across the St. Patty's Day parade yesterday, New York feels very much, back in Midtown. So that I think is the good news. I do think that the future, what we're seeing most of our clients adopting is some form of hybrid work. I think businesses believe in the importance of in-person work for the acronym that you just described, John. But I also think they understand the preferences of some, not all of their workers, is to have flexibility. So we are seeing more and more of our clients adopting 3 days in the office per week, 4 days in the office per week. And I do think hybrid, is I don't know if it's here to stay forever, but it's certainly a reality of the market right now. That all being said, I do think companies are also saying you can be out of the office and work flexibly for 2 days, but we want everybody here on Tuesday and Wednesday because they want the collaboration benefits of having everybody in the office at the same time. I also think the other thing that's interesting to me about all this is notwithstanding I would say, somewhat slow return to the office and the hybrid work model that we're seeing more and more, our leasing activity at BXP is at pre-pandemic levels. So the amount of space that we're leasing to clients is at where it was before the pandemic. So clearly businesses are planning on using offices in the future, but perhaps in a different way.
Well, thank you for your insights. That's extremely helpful. And I think that comment about leases being back to pre-pandemic level is an eye-opener. And obviously, you've got a wonderful reputation to stand on, and hopefully, I think that continues. Jeff DeBoer asked Fred a question that he said we'd follow up with you on, and that is, what can building owners do to entice workers back to the office, and again, encourage them and hope them to achieve a better work-life balance? Any thoughts?
Yeah. Most of the business leaders that I speak with and clients that I speak with, they want to have return to the office. Maybe not 100% of the time, but certainly a substantial amount of the time, because they believe that their culture frays without it. It's hard to mentor employees. It's hard to build connectivity. Retention rates are lower when people aren't working together. By the way, I think this is also true of entry-level employees who are seeking the apprenticeship of working with more senior people. They want to be in the office as well. So it's not I don't think it's across the board that people want to work remotely, but I think what's driving the remote work is the tight labor market conditions, because I think business leaders are reticent to be overly prescriptive about returning to the office when they face the potential risk that their employees will leave for a competitor. So the way we think about this is we need to help our clients, mainly the leadership at our clients, to entice their workers to come back to the office. So we have a philosophy that you have to think about the office not as an obligation, but as a destination. So what do great destinations have to have? Well, it's got to be a great place to work. It's got to be a better place to work than being at home. And that's the quality of the space, but it's also the collaboration benefits of working with others, and also the ability to do other things while you're at work. And so a lot of the comments that Fred made are what we're trying to do, is create extremely high quality place and space for our clients so they can more effectively encourage their workers to return. And, there's a lot of different elements to this. Some of it is in the building. So, gyms, bike rooms, technology. I think indoor air quality is a much more important factor for office users today than it was before the pandemic. Sustainability features that Fred mentioned. I also think very importantly is what's the environment around the building? Do you have restaurants and other amenities? We've gone to, percentage rent deals with many of our restaurants and other service providers that are located around our buildings to get them open, in anticipation of having the workforce return. So I think that's very important. If you look at the market today, you're seeing this. So if you look at office market statistics, the quality buildings have much higher leasing velocity, rental levels, and much lower vacancy rates than the market overall. And by the way, I should also mention transit. Proximity to transit is very important. So I think you're seeing a lot more bifurcation in the office market today amongst the buildings because of this destination versus obligation point. And then the last thing I just want to mention is, we need partners in this activity of helping our clients bring their workers back to the office. And one of the most important partners is city leadership. Security is critically important. Obviously, workers don't want to come back if they perceive the environment to not be safe. Sensible COVID regulation. Hopefully COVID is behind us. But certainly when we see the recovery of our cities, the cities that had more restrictive COVID regulations have recovered more slowly. So I think that's an important point. And then lastly, encouragement. Mayor Adams here in New York's been a wonderful advocate for getting workers and companies back to the office. And Fred mentioned the activities that Mayor Breed has done in San Francisco, and we are deeply appreciative of those, and we think they're very meaningful and important.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate your comments, especially for the leadership of Eric Adams. And I would also say that the governor in New York as a whole, Kathy Hochul, has really done a nice job, really reaching down deep into the communities of the New York State and encouraging people to get back. I think she really understands, as most mayors and governors do, how important those small businesses are all about. One last question I have for you is that, do you get a sense that this new normal varies by sector? I'll give an example: return to office, different types of businesses like tech companies, law firms. How would you respond to that, Owen?
Yeah, John, I think there will be differences, but I don't think it's so much by sector. I think it's by job function. So let me explain. Certainly by sector, the technology companies are lagging other businesses in returning to the office. Last year, I would say the financial service companies, asset managers, certainly alternative asset managers, banks, they were quite prescriptive on return to office. The technology companies have only most recently announced return to office plans, and most of them have in either this month or next month, but very slow, 1 day a week, 2 days a week, that type of thing. But we know, because many of those major technology companies are our clients, they're completely committed to in-person work, and they've probably been the most voracious users of new space, during the pandemic in terms of new leases. So I think they will come back. I think the bifurcation is going to be more on job function. I think in companies, people that are client-facing, creating new products where collaboration is critical, I think those groups will be in the office more. I think groups that are supporting those functions, so accounting, IS, HR, those types of things, I think I think all companies are finding those activities can be done more effectively remotely. And so I think that's going to be where the major differences are. It's not going to be by industry, but it's going to be by job function in terms of how much remote work as a percentage of total is done in the future.
Well, thank you. That reminds me, you spoke about, Eric Adams, the new mayor of New York, who I think all of us would agree is doing a wonderful job. And that's on the city level. And Secretary Walsh, I'm just curious, I know you've been traveling the country, listening to quite a few conversations about this. I know Joe Biden, President Biden, wants to really lean in. What can the federal government do in partnership with business or on its own to sort of drive home the importance of what's going on right now in the workforce?
Well, a couple of things. Number one, the president made it very clear at the State of the Union a couple weeks ago that America's open and encouraging people to get back to work. I think that's one of the things that the president spoke about. His investment and our investment, the American people's investment in vaccines, and 75% of the American public vaccinated, and making sure that the guidelines that are put out are not complicated and they're straightforward. I think that's another piece that's really important. One thing I just want to add to what Fred said and Owen said, and Jeff didn't say this, but I know he means it. He would say this, is that it's not just about getting people into the office. It's the ecosystem around that building. It's the ecosystem around that community. Owen works for a company, those of you that don't know, in Boston, and has made a major investment around the North Station area of Boston. And in that investment, restaurants and shops and all kinds of things going on. They need people in that area. The downtown area, Fred and his company have made investments in the downtown area and making sure that there's an ecosystem of people down there, not just people living there, because there's very few living there, but the people that come into work every day. They're going into the buying a tie or buying a dress or buying a pair of shoes, having a sandwich. So that is really vitally important. I think the federal government's role in this is to assist and work with stakeholders, both on a city and national level. 2 years ago, when this pandemic began, there was no policy, no plan coming out of Washington. Fast forward 2 years later, now we're working people get back to work. You know, the president has instructed me and Secretary Gina Raimondo, quite honestly, as Secretary of Commerce, to work collectively together to create pathways into good jobs, work with employers, so that as you're bringing people back into the workplace, as these men talked about today and other folks are, making sure when there's shortfalls or gaps in training, that we fill those gaps, working very closely with government. I spoke today on a panel in Boston at New England Council, and when I was there, you know, quite honestly, I said the bottom line was, we can't go back to the same old workforce development job training program as the past. This is about creating a job for happening immediately. So how do we create pathways? And we have a real opportunity in this country, working with all of you in creating pathways for people of color as well, and women into industries that have been really locked out. Maybe locked out is too strong of a word, but have not even understood how to access these industries that work in your buildings or in your industry. So I think we're at a unique moment. The president wants to see America move forward, and it's better. It's better for our communities. It's better for people, and it's better for our neighborhoods. That when people are working. And now, if you can figure out the hybrid model, in some cases it works. In some cases, business, it doesn't work. John, you know this. Construction doesn't deal with hybrid. You can't have somebody working from home that's an iron worker tying steel. So we have to figure out how do we what industries we can do this in.
I just want to say thank you for your comments, and I appreciate your your commitment to helping us, assisting the business community, trying to reinforce this narrative. I also would say, I want to give a shout out to Gina Raimondo, the Secretary of Commerce. I know you two are close. You guys work together very, very often in Washington, and she's been a strong advocate of this as well too. So again, on behalf of the Real Estate Roundtable, we really appreciate it. Well, one thing before I turn it over to Jeff, one last question, Mr. Secretary, is there's been a lot of talk, as we all know, I think you mentioned it the other night at dinner, about the Great Resignation. Do you think that's a myth? And aren't labor statistics showing a decline in quits as well as a dip in job vacancies?
Yeah, I think the Great Resignation was a great tagline for somebody at one point in time. What we're seeing is people coming back to work at record numbers. And what we're looking at now is making sure that we have those people that want to be skilled up or trained or given the education, getting jobs. What we're seeing in America, fastest job growth, 7.4 million jobs. We're also seeing the lowest claims of unemployment since the 1970s. So people want to go back to work. And I think a lot of people that might have the Great Resignation, a lot of it was around people that retired early. And we saw last year, people retired 2.4 years earlier than they would have because of a pandemic. They retired early. We're starting to see a lot of those folks, I think, come back into the workforce. We're watching those numbers very closely. We're going to continue to monitor those numbers. Now, they might come back and not do 40, 50, 60 hours a week, but they are going to come back into the workforce. And I think that it's going to help our economy as we move forward, getting more people back into the workforce.
Thank you very much. Jeff DeBoer, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. I just want to comment, and Mr. Secretary, you clearly identify this cycle that we're all experiencing. Back to the workplace requires safe environments, requires healthy buildings, requires places to eat when people get downtown, requires housing that is relatively close to the workplace, and all of those things. I think that we can be, a positive voice to help you find policies that will help, in those areas. And we want to partner with you on that. I guess I just have one question for you. Are there things that we can do at a national level, or, there are real estate organizations, BOMA, the Building Owners and Managers Association, for example, at a local level, working on all of these issues. Is there any advice or things that you could tell us or suggest to us that we could be more positive? We are going to be working, obviously, owners themselves will be making their workplaces more and have been more safe and healthy, and the amenities and childcare. By the way, one thing we do here in some localities, there's restrictions on where, obviously, and we want to do it in a safe way, but where you can have daycare and child centers and so forth to help people. But any advice for us before you get back to your full daytime job, sir?
Well, first and foremost, it's not advice, it's an invitation. I would love to have you sit at the table with me and talk about what you're experiencing and how we can look at best practices. I think Owen said something really important, and I never thought of this as far as people coming back to the workforce and the competition piece of it, losing employees. And I'd like to dig deeper into that comments about what Owen said. But, as we think about what the future of work is in America, when President Biden ran for office, he talked about creating an opportunity pathway into the middle class. That wasn't because of the pandemic. That was because of in his soul, he feels that we need to create more opportunities in the middle class. He happens to become president at a very interesting historic moment in time. As John Fish laid out, the pandemic has been devastating to almost 1 million American families who've lost loved ones and people being sick. But there's also, out of the pandemic, a unique opportunity to reimagine what the workplace looks like in America. Not 5 years from now, but right now. And I think that we should capitalize on this moment in time to think about what are some of the best practices. It can't be across the board. It's not going to be in every industry. And I do agree. I don't know who said this, Fred, Owen, John, or you might have said it. There's nothing like having a collaborative meeting in a conference room in your office, sharing best ideas, because off of that meeting, there's other conversations that really help a business. We need to have those conversations, but I would love, Jeff, to have you and the roundtable be part of our conversation to think about, what are you seeing out there? Again, this is not a government telling you how we should run business, because that's not our business. We shouldn't be in that business. But how do we help other businesses, and how do we bring employees to the table so we can understand what employees need, what employers are looking for, and we can best spend federal taxpayers' dollars on making sure we're creating real pathways into good paying jobs.
Yeah, thank you. And as Fred said in the research, all of this contributes to state and local budgets, which provide the funds for services that citizens and cities need. So thank you for that. Fred or Owen, do you have any closing comments that you'd like to make, having heard all of this? Fred?
I would just echo a couple of Owen's comments. For 2 years, and I think, Owen, we're probably not alone in our sector. We've been trying to connect dots. Early on, we thought we were all going to be back after Labor Day. Then Labor Day comes and it's pushed off yet again and pushed off yet again. And we've gone through 3 different variants of COVID. I think we're getting more visibility in terms of how people are going to work. And while our leasing numbers aren't quite back to 2019, 2021 was a good year. One of the things we were really excited about was the average lease term was over 7 years. So all that early conventional wisdom that businesses were only going to enter into short-term leases, it was wrong. So that was encouraging. And I think we're at a moment, and Secretary Walsh and John and Jeff, what I really appreciate is I think we're at a moment in time right now where we really can encourage people to come back to the cities and come back to the offices. I agree with Owen's comment that businesses are rightly reticent to push too hard because of a very competitive labor market. But I really do think we're at a moment where if we're all together on this and we're really making the case for coming back, I think we're going to see really positive results. And I think our cities are going to be a big beneficiary.
Yep.
Thank you. Owen?
I would just add that I think the importance of in-person work is critical for American competitiveness in the world. And it's also critically important for the health of our urban areas, as Fred outlined. And I very much appreciate Secretary Walsh being here today, and I really appreciate the focus of the Real Estate Roundtable on this important topic. So thank you, John and Jeff.
Thanks very much, John. I'm going to push it back to you, but I wasn't going to say this, but it dawns on me. We've got all these Bostonians here. Maybe this is a little dangerous for me to say, but Tom Brady decided to go back to the workplace. I mean, anyway, thank you all for listening and thank you for participating. We've got our meeting coming up on the 25th and 26th of April for Roundtable members and in June for everyone. John, any closing comments and from you, sir?
Jeff, I just would echo Fred's, Owen's, secretaries, and your comments about thanking everybody. And I think at the end of the day, I think Fred hit it on the head. This is a very, very important conversation to our industry, and we need to stay together on this, both business, government, and business. It's the only way we're going to drive this narrative home. And at the end of the day, Owen, to your point, we've got the greatest country in America. We need to keep it that way. Thanks again, everybody. Hope you have a wonderful, safe weekend.
Thank you. Bye-bye.